What's up, Trunk Slayers? It's Monday. That means it's time for Spicy Monday. Got my Spicy Monday hat on. Given that we're moving into the summer and we're in heavy conference season, I want to talk a little bit more, as I've done a few times, kind of about the ecosystem of conferences and just kind of point out why it is the way it is. Because I complain a lot about elements of these conferences, but I figure not everybody knows about or gives a shit about how it all comes together. So you're going to hear from me a little bit about that today. Additionally, we're going to talk about why you're not seeing events the way you want to see and why you're also seeing as many events that you don't want to see. So I've got a little short slide presentation for the class. And we're going to kind of go over why you're seeing what you're seeing. I've broken this down into a pyramid. So what we're going to talk about is basically how conferences work, what you don't like, why they're fucked, and what needs to happen. All right, class. So I want you to visualize the idealized balanced event that you're all saying that you don't want. And we're going to get back to that in a minute. But a balanced event really has three things. We have sponsors, the vendors, the people putting their names in all the banners and the lanyards and all that shit. We have the speakers, the people getting up on stage that are talking, and we have the attendees, probably you, that are attending those. And I did this in Paint, forgive me, but the idea being here that everything's in balance, and there's a little bit of everything, and we have this happy little triangle. And the thing is, when these events are created for us, attendees complain that they don't like them. Speakers complain that they don't like them. And sponsors complain that they don't like them. Even though, as we'll see in a minute, all three categories are totally full of shit, and this is actually what they want. But let's show the breakdown of some different styles of events so we can kind of understand. So let's talk about the first one that I think everybody pretends that they can get behind, and that's the education-focused event. A good example of this would be MSP GeekCon that we just had. And so in an education-focused event, and I left the original division of the triangle up so you could look at it, you've still got your three categories, but you can see it's weighted more to have a lot of attendees showing up and a lot more influence of speaking and a lot less influence of the sponsors. And this is the type of event that I think much like a nonprofit for, I don't know, unwed teenage puppies, everybody just feels like they're supposed to say they like. And I'm not saying these events are bad, but the thing is that y'all don't really like these events, because if you look at this triangle, this is not only the breakdown of the influence, but this also pretty succinctly shows the breakdown of who needs to show up for the event to work. So yes, there are fewer sponsors. The sponsors have less power, but you need a lot more attendees to show up, and you need a decent group of speakers. And here's the thing at most of those educational only events. You don't get a decent group of speakers. You get an okay group of speakers, and a lot of attendees don't show up because, as it turns out, and we'll get to this in a minute, this isn't actually something that any of you really want to go to. So let's talk about the zero agenda 100% educational event. These are the events that very publicly claim to have no agenda whatsoever. In fact, there's no sponsorship. Come here only to learn. And they actually mean that. And these events usually fail. And the reason, at least in person, and the reason for that, if you look at the trifecta here, it's pretty much got to be a 50-50 split between attendees and speakers. A tiny little bit of sponsorship. Somebody might put their name on the lanyards, but that's on, other than a token effort, that's not the point. So it's supposed to be pretty much 50-50 speakers, attendees. Well, the thing is, it's not. And what ends up happening is you do get about 50% speakers, and that's usually a mixture of regular people and, people that the event sponsor have lined up. But the space is white because you don't get 50% attendees because people don't show up to this. And no one shows up to this because up here, no one's fucking paying for anything interesting. These events suck. So no one really goes to these. And these usually end up being online events only. Continuing forward, Well, you might be saying, that's fine, Dean, but what about the ecosystem event? IT Nation, IT Connect, NerdioCon, whatever. Any of those, DattoCon, and any of those events that are not entirely focused around one and I left out a few on purpose. We'll talk about them in a minute. So those events that aren't focused around only one product, but are built around the ecosystem for that product. And these are the events that are probably some of the first events a lot of us have attended, and they generally do tend to be the most entertaining events because, as you can see, the event is definitely skewed more towards the sponsors having a lot of power and investment. There is a smaller amount of focus and emphasis on the speakers, generally because the sponsors have more money and do want to have a good event. They can curate the speaker pool a little bit better and get some people that are a bigger draw, although you're less likely to get somebody that actually looks like, talks like, and sounds like you on stage. You're more likely to get somebody that's a few Kevin Bacon degrees of separation away from you. And then the attendees, about the same size as it is in a balanced event, with maybe a little bit more, only because the sponsor of the ecosystem is able to put a little more weight into discounting attendance, giving out tickets, or otherwise forcing you to be there. And so this is usually how the standard ecosystem event breaks down. And I never really had an issue with these events, but a lot of people don't like that there's this much of the sponsorship they don't want to be sold to. So let's look at the extreme version of this. So I'm calling this the shill event. There's one going on very shortly. I won't name them. They're a distributor, and their name rhymes with late. So what's the problem with the shill event? So a shill event is just like the ecosystem event, but taken to the extreme. And so that's where basically the sponsor, yes, there may be other vendors there, but fuck them. This event is for the hosting sponsor. The speakers are all either directly paid by, are only talking about, or have otherwise been handcuffed to only speaking on things that feed into the primary sponsor. The attendee pool is very limited because nobody really wants to go to this unless you're already heavily in this ecosystem. So the attendees to these events either feel completely obligated to go, or they have quite literally been paid to show up by the sponsor, with free tickets, room and board, and all that shit. And shill events have their place, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But most of us who like going to events in general probably don't attend shill events unless we're already very, very heavily invested in whatever platform the sponsor is. And so, having gone through all of those breakdowns of events, we go back to the balanced event that really is what we need. Because the thing is, with a balanced event, you have both monetary and financial homeostasis, but you also have agenda homeostasis. Because the thing is, ultimately, conferences need to make money. I've talked about this before. Whether they're for profit or break even, they have to make money. And they make money directly or indirectly from this fucking Triforce. And if you don't have this Triforce roughly in balance, then one of the different groups represented here starts to get real butthurt about who is and isn't making money. And we could get on a whole separate video about how ridiculously childish that is. And we could pick any group we want, sponsors, attendees, speakers, and talk about just what ridiculous, immature children they are for getting upset about a paid industry event whose ultimate goal is to influence people to buy. But that's a different video. So what's important here is to understand that you need a decent group of varied sponsors who are fairly paying to be there and are bringing their tables and events and their swag and paying for fun things to do, because that's what attendees enjoy. Attendees like to eat that up. Yum, 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 yum. I want some free t-shirts, and I want to go out for Topgolf, and I want to go out for a dinner, or I want to go to Universal Studios or whatever. I want that. But I don't want to pay for that. I'm an attendee. So I'm damn sure not paying $4,000 for my event ticket. So sponsors got to foot some of that. But here's the thing. If we only have sponsors and attendees, well, we already saw what that looks like. If we only have sponsors and attendees, Ain't nobody want to fucking go to that. So we need interesting people that are going to potentially teach us something, affirm that we're already right, which is a great and validating feeling, or just otherwise have some level of interest. So you need a diverse and interesting group of speakers. And ultimately, the only way you're going to get a diverse and interesting group of speakers, meaning keynote speakers and session speakers, is you can't just only pull them from the attendees or the sponsors or outside sources. You need to pull them from all three. And the balanced event is far more likely to draw a wide stable of speakers that will appeal to the widest audience because it's fucking balanced, everybody. And because they don't have to only talk about the primary sponsor, or I don't have to have shitposty speaking sessions by people who shouldn't be up on stage, etc., etc. And I don't have to do things like mute or otherwise diminish my keynote with some goofball speaker that has no business being in a keynote, or conversely, I don't need to stack the entire talk with a bunch of people who are only shilling. Y'all get that. And those good speakers draw in more attendees, and this is a wonderful little ecosystem that feeds itself. Thank you for attending my PowerPoint. Can't really seem to arrive at balance because ultimately, and I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad for event organizers, it's very hard to keep all three groups happy. Because we can't arrive at balance, we end up in these weird situations. And the current form that's taking in our space is everybody's making their own conference, and there's also at the same time an arms race being expected by us, the attendees, that not all of these individual conferences can, of course, offer because they don't have that breakdown of both revenue sources but also attendance draw sources. So no, not every event can end up doing something cool like renting out Universal Studios or having the entire Disney guest experience team come down and spend a day teaching a course. Like, they can't all afford to do that, but we've started to expect that. And so events have started to get more and more expensive. Someone's got to offset that cost. I'm certainly, as I said, not going to eat up a bigger ticket. So more of that cost is going on the vendors. That means that only vendors that have enough, basically MDF put aside to afford to do that are showing up, which means that you are now only getting spoken to, pitched at, or educated by an increasingly narrower funnel of vendors, really only the ones who can afford to be there. And the whole thing's just fuck sideways. And it's not set up anymore to help us with the original premise that I think all industry events initially are set up to do, which is to help me learn, to help me find out about new solutions that I might buy that I wouldn't otherwise know about, and then just to help everybody network, meet their peers, and kind of level set to how the industry is going. And we're losing out on a lot of that now as this sort of event arms race has kind of continued forward. So as an MSP or as a vendor, what do you do? If you're an MSP, I think ultimately we have to start saying no to some of these events. Yeah, there's a large space, 40,000, 80,000, 100,000, whatever the number is for MSPs in North America. And then we add into that our poor, sister continents, Europe and Australia, that are only now getting treated to events. Sorry, everybody over there. But as MSPs over here in North America, we need to start being more picky with what we go to. And not only where we offer up our attendance dollars, but where we offer up our eyeballs. So I think that does mean that the people who are starting to pull back a little bit from going to every event or going to as many events, I think you're on the right track. I would suggest an MSP, you develop an event budget if you don't already have one, and just don't exceed it. I don't care how cool it is. And remember that even if you live locally or you are given a free ticket, your time still has value because that's time you're not spending doing something else. So you should have an event budget and just start being a little more picky with what you will and won't go to. As a vendor, well, I think it's a little bit more challenging. Events largely are a marketing and lead gen crutch for a lot of vendors who don't really know how to do that otherwise. And that's a topic for another video. And I also think there are a lot of vendors that use events to kind of beta test and temperature test their marketing and messaging. And once again, that is a far more complicated conversation. But I think at the very least, Vendors, you also need to start being a little bit more selective. I know it feels good to be seen at events. It feels good to see our vendor friends. And there is a perception that if you don't show up all the time, you will be forgotten. Well, my friends, there is this thing called the internet. And vendors, there are so many communities that I know for a fact most of you aren't in because I'm in them and I don't see you show up. Start showing up there. First of all, you're going to reach a way wider audience than the same 10,000 or so MSPs that go to all the events that are sick and tired of hearing your messaging anyways and just want a t-shirt from you. And please shut the fuck up and don't tell me about your product and give me that t-shirt. I'm walking away already. So you're not going to see those people. You're going to see new people. It's going to force you to think more critically about what problem you actually solve and what your product actually does, and not beta test that on your half-drunk friends in an event space. But also, it's going to level the playing field again, where not just the vendors that have the cash to go to these events can go to these events. It'll allow everybody else to also have an equal playing field. Because I'll tell you right now, as an example, on our MSP, I have just as much, if not more power than ConnectWise does in terms of posting. And mostly that's because A, that's pretty democratized, and B, I've put in work to talk there, and well, they haven't. So smaller vendors, medium-sized vendors, you too have the power of community. You should get your ass out there and start making a real effort to talk to the people that you think you're talking to at these events, because that's going to cause you to start going, do we really need to get a booth at such and such? And the answer will be no. And we'll pull back as well. As that demand from both MSPs and from vendors starts to decline a little bit, that's going to mean that only the events that have the most legs on them to subsist and be run properly, that are more close to that balance, will survive. This is going to take a while, everybody. We're going to have to work at this if we want to fix it, but we absolutely can. Have a great Monday. Please be spicy. Post your spice. Like and subscribe. All that shit. But more importantly, #SpicyMonday. I want to hear from you. All right?